Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for braving the rain and coming over here. If you are here, there's lots of booze, so feel free to grab that at any point in the proceedings. We started this series, How to Make Good Things Happen, as a bit of an antidote to pessimism. And actually, some of that pessimism is somewhat irrational because, as this discussion will show, even those problems that you think, oh, that's pretty intractable, probably no progress has been made, let alone big leaps. And actually, you'll see today that huge change has happened in terms of the numbers of people who are employed leaving prison 6 months afterwards. I think it's gone up by more than double. And I think it's just a really good illustration of some of the good things that still continue to happen, even amongst the sort of chaos and relative problems that we face at the moment. And what we're going to do today is really dig into, well, what actually happened, why, what drove it, and also are there any lessons that we can take to other policies? So without further ado, I'm going to get the panel going. I'll ask all of the panelists to actually just introduce themselves. We'll have a sort of moderated discussion, but we will have time for Q&A afterwards. So please do get your questions ready. To those of you online as well, please do also send in questions and we'll try and cover them towards the end. So over to you.
Thanks. Yes, I'm John Collins. I'm Chief Executive of a charity called Prisoners Education Trust, which provides access to distance learning for people in prison across England and Wales, and also takes a broader interest in prison education and training policy.
Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Max. I'm one of the founders of Redemption Roasters. You may know us as a coffee shop brand. We are a prison-based coffee company. That's what we call ourselves. We used to roast all of our coffee behind prison bars. Now we actually outgrew that space, but we still have 5 in-custody academies where we teach prisoners coffee skills, and then we hire into our shops. We have 12 coffee shops in London. About 30% of our shop staff are prison leavers.
Great. My wife is a big fan of the coffee shop that you have. So
Great.
Hi, I'm Penelope Gibbs. I'm director of a charity called Transform Justice, which tries to do what it says on the tin. We are partners with a charity called Unlock, which specialises in people with criminal records, in a campaign called Fair Checks. Fairchecks.org.uk is advocating for reform of criminal records disclosure.
Right, I didn't actually introduce myself, so I'm Ravi Gurumurthy and I'm the CEO of Nesta. Nesta includes also the Behavioural Insights team and Challenge Works, and we're an innovation foundation. We design experiments, build ventures and shape policy.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Serini. I work for New Futures Network, which is part of His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service. I'm the head of innovation there, so what I do is look to design programs, services and build partnerships with the rest of the team at New Futures Network. We're an employment specialist team, so quite a small team working nationally across a large remit. And I'm pleased to be here.
Thanks, Serini. So I'm Nick. I work for the frozen food company Cook, and I'm part of our 2-person team, which is the raw talent team, which works with people with barriers to employment. And including those barriers to employment are people with convictions, people who have had experience of being in prison. We have had 250 people through the raw talent program to date, and I myself do have lived experience as well, so I'll be on this panel with the lived experience angle.
Right, welcome. First of all, thank you all of you for making it over and look forward to the discussion. Serini, I wonder whether I can just start with you. We're just going to do a quick lightning round and get a couple of minutes in from each of you. But can you say a little bit about what are the key policy successes that have driven this big surge in employment over the last 3 years, I think, isn't it?
Over the last 3 years. So the stats that you've got show that at the 6-month point after someone is released from prison, so if they are in work within the first year of leaving prison, there's a 9% percentage point reduction in their likelihood of reoffending. So it's really remarkable, actually, that the figures have gone up. So over the last few years, there's been more success in getting more prison leavers into employment, which is brilliant. And some of the things that I've seen from New Futures Network and have been really pleased to be part of, I've been with the team for the last 6 years, actually. And one of the key things that the government changed was actually having a dedicated employment team. So 6 years ago or 7 years ago, we didn't have a service that was dedicated to creating partnerships with employers, nationally, thinking about and targeting key sectors where there are skills shortages, where there are gaps in hiring and a real need for a kind of throughput of talent and a real pipeline to be created. Whereas now we've got teams working on key sectors and looking to build partnerships to support organisations to fill those gaps. There are other changes within policy and practice as well. So one of the key things is that actually over the last few years, the culture has really changed within prisons. There's been a really noticeable shift from having a dedicated team and a dedicated service looking into employment and increasing prisoner leave employment. And what that's led to is more accountabilities. So actually prisons within the performance measurements for prisons nationally, there's a greater weighting towards employment and pre-release activities, which of course do change behaviours within prisons where staff and stakeholders feel much more accountable to actually delivering success for those resettlement outcomes. So I think the kind of culture shift and accountability is really palpable, as well as that development of partnerships. And just on the partnerships point as well, one of the key changes I think for us is really drawing in expertise and looking outward for support. There are some brilliant organisations, including across the third sector, who are working amazingly across kind of regions within the national context as well to support people with lots of a variety of needs. And it's been incredible to strengthen and deepen those partnerships and develop that network more as well.
So just to sort of capture, so you're saying someone in charge with a dedicated employment service in prison, plus these partnerships with employers, plus the kind of culture change that's probably come from those two things. Is that?
Yeah,
that's what you'd reckon. Yeah, that's what, okay, great. Let me hear from perhaps John. What's your perspective on the policy change over the last 3 years, and do you buy that basic change?
I mean, I do fundamentally. I mean, I think what we've seen in the last few years has been a pretty conventional policy process in some ways. There was a change, as just been mentioned, to the targets that prisons have to meet. Employment was added in as one of them, one of the ways that prisons are rated. And then after the previous election, there was a prisons white paper in 2021, which made employment post-release more of a priority, and then a series of policy initiatives after that to try and implement that. The introduction of employment hubs within prisons, of employment advisory boards for each prison to better link up prisons with employers, and the introduction of heads of education, skills and work, so a senior management type post within the prison to bring together all the work that's done within prison on education, training and work to try and improve the experience of learners within prison and make sure that as much as possible all the work that was being done was aligned to help people get into work, to be ready for work when they leave and to get into work when they do. And we just had a couple of other things which I think are worth bearing in mind. The first is that the data that we're looking at runs from about 2020, 2021 until now, and we've seen a substantial increase in the proportion of people moving into employment in that period. But we need to take into account that when the baseline started was the middle of COVID lockdown, and since then there's been obviously the unravelling of lockdown, first in the community and then in prisons. There's also been quite a tight labour market, so there's been a real demand for people to fill vacancies, and it's meant that employers have maybe looked at employing out of prison in a way they might not have done in a time when there was less pressure on finding people. But I don't by any means think that's the whole explanation, because actually, as the number of vacancies has fallen in the last year, 18 months, the proportion of prison leavers moving into work has continued to go up. So I think, as always with this, it'd be nice to point at a thing and say that's what it is, but I think it's a mixture of external environment, policy changes within prison, and I think you can also see that by prioritising this at a government level, that goes down into both policy changes within prison, but also to cultures within prison of employment being seen as something that was more important. It's not that there's not more that you could do, of course there is, but there has been, I think, real progress made on that in the last few years.
And before COVID, what was the rate? Because it was 14% and it then got to 30-odd%, is that right?
Yeah, so this comparable data wasn't published before that. That's the first set of data there is. There is a few bits of data from the couple of years before COVID, and that's only for 6 weeks rather than 6 months afterwards. But it is higher than it was during the COVID period, but significantly lower than it is now. So that's why I think it's part of the picture, but it's certainly not the whole picture, just that we started measuring at a point where inevitably employment outcomes will be worse.
Great. Penelope.
I mean, I just like to, people have, like John have talked about the sort of policy successes. I want to talk a bit about the narrative and convening. So I think it's one of the things that ministers, both in the last government and this government, have actually seized on and kind of gone out there to actually talk it up in terms of what a good thing it is for employers to employ prison leavers. And I think that kind of, those speeches, those TV interviews, they really matter. It affects everybody, and they're confident, to an extent, their confidence in doing it. And then the other thing they've done is obviously convening, which other people can do, but they have a huge power to convene. And so via the employment boards and the other kind of mechanisms, they've done a huge amount of convening, praising the champion employers, that kind of thing. I would say that, policy-wise, what they haven't done, what they've done a bit, Robert Buckland did a bit, is kind of address this massive barrier to employment, which is criminal records.
What did they didn't do anything on that?
Robert Buckland did do something, to give him credit. He, so this is going to get a bit complicated. There's these things called basic DBS checks. Any employer can ask of an employee, can get a basic DBS check. And that shows, according to the offence and the sentence, it will show some stuff. But after a certain point, after, say, you've been in prison, that prison sentence won't appear on a basic DBS check. And Robert Buckland just kind of, I think, literally believed in it, and he shortened a lot of those periods. So now, when you come out of prison, you have to reveal that on a basic check for less time than before Robert Buckland did some legislative reforms. But the bit of criminal records which is untouched in this sense for adults is what are called enhanced and standard DBS checks. A lot of people in this room will have had those at some point, and there are nearly 7 million of those checks every year.
Right. Okay. Nick, can I come to you and just ask you, actually, Nick and Max, do you think that the policies that have been talked about, in particular, having an employment service, having partnerships with employers, the shift in culture, does that feel palpable to you? Do you think it's actually translated into real experience on the ground with employers and with people in prison?
Do you want to go first, or?
You go first.
Yeah, I think I have seen that, especially with the launch of the employee advisory boards. Definitely, there's been just what's been lacking in communication between the probation service, between prison employment leads, and between businesses is now a much smoother transition. So you've got all of the people with all of the information and knowledge in one space. So instead of having to go between and taking 4 or 5 emails to get to one answer, it's in one room, and it can all be answered in that one room, which makes it far easier. I think the main thing that I've seen, especially from a local thing, because obviously we encourage other employers within a local region to do similar to what we're doing, and they can actively see the results. They can see the results in terms of statistics and in terms of stories, and it touches people's heads and their hearts. And hearing that you can make a real difference and make a positive influence on society and also get a better workforce, it just speaks to both the head and heart, and it's a really hard argument to turn down, really.
Right.
Can I say, though, it is a hard argument to turn down, but I would urge everybody to read a Read in Partnership report that came out recently, which was a poll of employers, and it was over 1,000 employers. And that is such a depressing read. 1 in 5 of those employers would not look at anybody with a criminal record at all. And 57% said they'd never recruited somebody with a conviction. And that that was actually that was a higher percentage than when they last did the poll. So they did that poll about sort of in 2013. And so what this shows is we've got this pocket of really keen and converted employers. But out there, the vast majority of employers, so if 1 in 5 will completely reject a candidate with a criminal record, then you're going to get another third who probably aren't very keen on it. And so I think there is still a way to go to get to the vast majority of employers. And one thing is, I mean, I found this quite extraordinary. Only 10% of employers who, on this poll, would employ somebody convicted of criminal damage if they found that on a criminal record. Now, criminal damage is quite a low-level crime. So we're talking about massive prejudice out there.
So we're going to get into employer behaviours and norms and incentives in a bit, and including on the public sector as well, which would be interesting to pick up. But Max, do you want to just come in?
Yeah, sure. And we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. And I would lie if I'd say it hasn't been without difficulties. It is very tricky working with a juggernaut that is in such flux as the UK politics has been, especially for a small organization like ours. We have certainly had troubles when we had our production facility behind bars. I mean, the sheer logistics of moving lots of stuff in and out of a prison is one thing. But then there's a big cultural mismatch as well. We've seen some really motivated and inspired members of staff in prisons, but we've also seen people who just don't get it and who are as institutionalized as the people they are guarding, and they look at us with suspicion and really put roadblocks in our way, and that's been really tricky to see and at times disheartening. I do believe that some of the changes we've seen recently are making a positive difference, and we can see it in some of the stats. On a very basic level, and I say this from a business perspective, if you start measuring things, usually that helps. And before such time, a lot of these stats weren't even measured, and governors were not held to account, and certainly their teams weren't. So that has been a very positive change with regards to employment. There's still a lot of work to do, and employment is a building block of reducing reoffending. And even deeper building block is housing, and we're still releasing about 1,000 people every year without housing. And if you don't have a home to go to, it's unlikely you'll hold down a job.
And how did you come to do what you're doing? What was the sort of inspiration behind it?
I was previously in coffee. I was a co-founder of another coffee company called Black Sheep Coffee, and I spun out the wholesale business into a new company. We were approached by someone from the Ministry of Justice at a trade show at the London Coffee Festival, and they said, we're looking at employers looking to hire prison leavers, and we're also looking at employers looking to teach hospitality skills generally in prison. And we thought, sounds interesting. I've never been to prison before. And we were quite naive at the time. We were sort of part of that privileged part of society that's never been in touch with the criminal justice system and just thinks it works. And back then there wasn't quite so much in the media about the bad state it was in, but we did a bit of research, and we went to our first prison, Aylesbury, in the day. And we found quite quickly that there was a huge addressable market, and there was a big problem to be solved. And there was something we could build a point of difference around. We don't come from a charity background. My business partner and I are both from a business background. So we saw it as an opportunity to do something unusual and cool in the first instance. And in the second instance, did we realize we can actually change lives.
Great, thank you. Srini, can I come to you? So let's go deeper into sort of the prison system now and try and paint a picture of how that looks differently. What's the sort of user experience, if you like, now compared to a few years ago?
So there are probably three key groups that have experienced change within prisons. Prisoners themselves, staff and other kind of stakeholders or partner organisations that are working within prisons and on the employment agenda, as well as those that are working in the community as well. And I really hope, and actually some of the feedback here around the employment advisory boards, one of the other key changes is the experience of employers working with prisons. So from a prisoner perspective, what has changed is that there are now dedicated employment hubs within prisons. So for the first time, it's a space within a prison that's usually within that kind of resettlement environment where colleagues come together. Those are ID and banking administrators who deliver really helpful services that mean prisoners can, have an opportunity to set up a basic bank account for their use on release that can support them with ID, which are really, they're really crucial and fundamental barriers that can be the first hurdle for someone to take up work on their release, as well as, get accommodation and housing and some of those other benefits when someone's released. So that is the place where someone can go to find support with careers advice, to talk about disclosure, as Penny alluded to. So I think that's a huge change for staff. Just having the hub and being able to coalesce around within an area to work together to deliver some of those programs and services is really important, supported by employment advisory boards. So the boards that have been mentioned by a few people are that they've been set up. They're fairly new. There are 93 of them across the country. So they support prisons across England and Wales and the adult estate, and they're a collection of employers for the most part, as well as prison colleagues. And more recently, we've got regional employment councils. There are fewer of them, but they also draw in the support of Department for Work and Pensions, probation, and colleagues from the third sector as well as key kind of external partners. So what we should be seeing, and what staff as well as those organisations will be feeling, is that they are coming together to be able to discuss individuals who are nearing their release, think about and feed back to us around some of those systemic barriers that still exist, so we can actually make some change. And I forgot my third one, is prisoners, stakeholders, and I suppose the journey for employers as well. In having a setup where we have account managers, dedicated account managers, we have regional employment brokers that are working with organisations that work in a local and regional level, national employment managers who are sector-based specialists who work with, big industries, and those members of staff are the dedicated individuals who will now work with organisations to remove some of those barriers to entries, whether that's, supporting someone to get into a prison, like at Aylesbury, or set up an industries workshop. It's just really trying to work through what the barriers are to entry for those employers.
Great. John, can you say a bit about the impact on learning and learners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, a lot of what we've heard about so far has been about employment for people as they get ready for release and then when they're out in the community. But the bit that should come before that is education and training for people in prison. And we know three things fundamentally. The first is that people coming into prison have got much lower levels of literacy and numeracy on average than the general population, much lower. They've got fewer previous qualifications, and they're much more likely to have had disrupted experiences of school and mainstream education. So we know that there's educational need there. We also know that there's extensive evidence that people who take part in education in prison are much more likely to get a job when they leave than those who don't, and are much less likely to reoffend than those who don't. But thirdly, we also know that education in prison at the moment is nowhere near good enough. So consistently, Ofsted inspections, reviews by the prison inspectorate have shown that it's by far the worst performing education sector out there. Consistently, Ofsted reviews are not positive. And we also know that fewer people access education in prison than did a decade or so ago, and that new contracts introduced towards the end of last year are going to see a reduction of between 20 and 25% of education provision on average across the prison estate. So I think there's a huge gap there in terms of, if we want to get a larger proportion of people who are in prison employment ready by the time they leave, And bear in mind that despite all the successes, and they are successes, 2/3 of people leaving prison are still not in employment 6 months after they leave. So the majority are still unemployed of those available to work. I think if we want to get more of those people ready for a job while they're in prison so they can get a job when they leave, we really need to look at how we can improve education and training and ensure that what is there is both good quality and relevant to what employers are looking for when people leave. So you're getting the right qualifications in the right sectors so that you're likely to get a job when you leave prison. And I think some of the work that has been done has started to improve that. And there have been some improvements in education quality in the last year to 18 months. But I think the current cuts to provision really put that progress at risk and may make it more likely that people who come into prison without the basic skills to get a job will leave prison still without those basic skills in place. And those who are furthest from the labour market will be those who are least likely to be able to then get a job. So I think if we don't sort out that education and training piece, we're much less likely to be able to continue to make progress and get those who might benefit most from having a job into a position when they can be employed when they leave.
Penelope, can you talk a bit about sort of how consistent is this progress, and has there been much change in terms of a sense of accountability for outcomes?
I mean, I think the accountability is partly in the numbers, which we've discussed. And so I think that's there, and there are internal processes in every prison to kind of track progress there. But in terms of the education piece, you know, I don't know what to say about the fact that we've cut the funding to education in terms of accountability. That, you know, it's a fact. It has been cut. And that seems such a tragedy when in prisons at the moment, the conditions are pretty appalling in most prisons. And this is both obviously something that can lead towards employment, but also it is something to do, which prisoners really need.
Perhaps we can just come back on the education front for a little bit. I mean, perhaps, Max, you want to talk about what you actually look for in terms of candidates and your experience on the other side of kind of the skills profile and what we actually need there from the prison system.
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously mainly speak for the hospitality sector because that's the sector I'm in. But when we started this, I was amazed to see how often prison employment leads were talking about, or education and skills leads, employment leads didn't exist back then, about all these qualifications that they were delivering and how people were getting the City and Guilds diploma for this and that. And I thought to myself, we're not looking for this. We look for people who can pass a trial shift and make coffee or give friendly customer service. And I really don't care if somebody comes with 12 certificates that they've managed to accrue over their time in prison. And I've been trying to bang that drum in my various roles within the prison. And I think slowly prisons are understanding that. And the most important thing is for an employer to meet a currently serving prisoner or a prison leaver, but also for that prisoner to meet a potential employer. And if that human connection has been made, that is the biggest factor leading to a potential employment.
But presumably you need basic literacy and numeracy in those you employ.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
So I think it's really important. Like, of course, you need to give people the skills the employer is looking for, but about 10,000 people who were sent to prison last year, and this is consistent across every year. So about 1 in 5 are when they're assessed at their literacy level when they arrive at prison, or what's known as entry level 1, which for those people who aren't familiar with adult literacy levels means National Literacy Trust say would struggle to read a road sign or write a message to their family. If you haven't got that level of basic literacy, doesn't matter how good your customer service is, to be frank, you need to be able to manage basic numbers and basic reading. And if people don't get those skills, and the Inspectorate have done a lot of work on reading in recent years and highlighted, while there has been some progress, a lot of people are going into prison not able to read and coming out of prison still not able to read. It's a huge missed opportunity to give them a life skill they need for a job, but also just to manage the housing and benefits system. And as you said earlier, if you can't get a house, really hard to get a job. But if you haven't got basic literacy, numeracy, and digital skills, it's really hard to manage housing and benefits and all those other things you need to have the sort of infrastructure behind you to get and keep a job. And there are lots of very supportive employers who help you with that. But as Penelope was saying, there's a lot of employers who just want to employ someone who can come in and do a job. And at best, they don't care they've been in prison. And that's at best most of the time. But if they haven't got core skills, they're not going to be able to hold down a job in most sectors.
And do we know what works in addressing that in prison and with this in this context?
I mean, yes, there are there are a few prisons who do a relatively good job, and there's a huge amount of research evidence on delivering good quality education to adults, which can be adaptive for the prison environment. One of the things that I think is always quite frustrating is that Ofsted, in the same way as they inspect schools or further education colleges, they come in, they inspect a prison education department, they make a number of recommendations, they come back a year later, and a significant proportion of those recommendations won't have been implemented. So we know some of the stuff that would help make improvements. I don't want to trivialize it. It is extremely difficult to deliver good quality education in an environment as challenging as the current prison system, and it is often a sort of factor of the broader challenges in running a regime and getting people out of their cell, as well as in the education department. So the whole prison needs to get that right. But we do know quite a lot about what works and what makes good quality reading education, vocational education, and education more broadly. And too many prisons, for a whole factor of reasons, some of which are outside the control of the education department, just aren't able to deliver that at the moment. And I don't think cutting the volume of provision by a quarter can possibly help to make those improvements, when what you actually need when you're dealing with a lot of people who've got additional learning needs or low levels of skills coming into prison is more one-on-one work, more work with people outside of the classroom, which is incredibly important but quite resource intensive.
Nick, how would you sort of characterise the sort of education and training experience at the moment, and what does it need to be if we're actually serious about this?
Yeah, I think I echo Max's statement where he said, like, look, people are coming to you with reams and reams of things that they've said, oh, look, I've done this course, I've done this course, I've done this course, but where is that getting you? Is that actually getting you on the path of getting a job that's available to you? And quite often it isn't. You know, they've done bricklaying, they've done city and guilds, they've done hairdressing sometimes, they've done all of these, but is that going to help you get the job on the other side? I mean, we're in a fortunate position where we can actually take people who don't have literacy, so they don't read or write, and that's absolutely fine because we look for, you know, can they work? Are they willing to work, basically? And that's great, but yeah, with a company, if you're coming in and saying we need someone who has good customer service, are they learning those soft skills? Are they learning how to have difficult conversations, which more than likely they are, but not in a formal setting? Are they learning how to, present themselves in an appropriate manner? You know, these people have quite often, as I did, huge transferable skills, and it's just about redesigning their mindsets as well. Because I know when I went into prison, the whole way through my process, I was spoken to by my POM about getting a job that was similar to what I was doing before, which was complete nonsense. I needed someone to have a straight conversation with me and say, look, things have changed now. You need to change your mindset, and the world is still out there for you. You have so many opportunities, but you might need to just change your mindset a little bit and start from a different place than you were when you went into prison. And I think training can take on so many forms, and it can be sort of academic, or it can be soft skills. It can be employers going in and giving people belief, giving them hope, and giving them an actual tangible thing to, if you complete this course, you can get this job, or at least be put forward to get this job. And that's something that someone can hold on to, rather than, oh, what's the benefit of me doing English and maths? What's that actually going to give me at the end of it? Is that going to get me a job? Whereas if you're saying, if you do this course, you can have this job, it's going to completely change the way that people think.
If I may, and also I think in response to some of that, the challenges that we do have in that core education offer, one of the things that I think is really important within the prison environment is where employers are coming in to set up commercial workspaces, and they're running academies within the prison environment. So that's that direct link between real, training, hands-on training. It's those tests, and it's that ability to shape those kind of enduring skills, whether that's confidence, motivation, belief, it's teamwork, all of those enduring skills, as well as those technical skills and qualifications, are some of the more pioneering work I think that's underway in prisons. So there's something called the Future Skills Programme that's operating, I think it's in about 11 prisons. I might have got that figure wrong. But what it really is looking to do is bridge the gap between education training and then a job on release. So it's attracting employers and providers that are, from the outset, thinking about the job at the end, thinking about guaranteed interviews, and making sure that there's actually a link between what you're doing within prisons, not just ticking as many qualifications that may be outdated by the time you leave, and making sure that does have a kind of guaranteed link to a job and interview on release.
And just moving now on to sort of employers, and I think you picked up the point about just how problematic it is in terms of the number of employers who are prepared to actually employ prisoners. What needs to be done?
I mean, to be honest, we need to change the whole narrative about people who get in trouble with the law and who they are and being able to move on from the crimes. I mean, the problem about a DBS check, I don't know if anybody's ever seen one, but, you see the offence and, that immediately labels the person. And I'm not entirely surprised, given the whole kind of media furor about people committing crime, that so many employers won't look at somebody with a criminal record. But I think what's a bit more depressing about this Reed survey, and admittedly it's only 1,000 employers, but we haven't got anything else at the moment, is that more employers, according to Reed, are trying to get DBS checks. Now that, to me, is the wrong place to start. Because if you're an employer who doesn't need to get DBS checks, and can I just say that is the majority of employers in this country, don't need to ask for a basic DBS check, if you were asking for it, you've immediately got that mindset, I need to find out whether this person has been in trouble with the law, and that must be for a reason, that if they have, it's a barrier. Whereas, say in America, in lots of states, so every single state in the US has a different criminal records policy. And some of the states, and here we're talking Democrat and Republican, by the way, this kind of movement goes across the two parties, they have actually ban the box in primary legislation. So that means that employers in those states cannot, in that initial application, ask whether somebody has a criminal record. I mean, it doesn't mean to say they won't ask for a check later on, but at least it's a really good first step, because it means that that person, if they've got the same qualifications as someone else and they do the form well, they can get their foot through the door. Whereas our ban the box is just like, if you'd like to and be a nice employer, do ban the box. Whereas I think what this survey reveals is that the government could lead on it, but we need a wholesale kind of attitudinal change to employing people who, not just people who've been in prison. Most people with criminal records haven't been in prison, and yet there's prejudice from employers, as we saw on the criminal damage one. I mean, a huge number of employers apparently wouldn't employ somebody with a driving offence. So it's a bigger thing about, and the government has to lead here, but also somehow we need to get into the media narrative about whether somebody who does something bad once, like a driving offence, is then cannot do a job. And with enhanced DBS checks, one of the problems is that they, so if you've been in prison and you were sentenced for just 2 weeks, and it does happen, that comes up on your enhanced DBS check all your life. You can never escape it. And therefore, you're always going to come up against employers who go, what's this that you did, when you were 19? You went to prison. Why did you go to prison? And so on. And so we just have this culture of, suspicion and thinking that it's of value to tell people 40 years later that you were in prison for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, over 90% of employers who employ prison leavers report that they're very happy with them about attendance, about retention, about teamwork and trustworthiness. And the same has been with us. Okay, fair enough, we're a relatively small employer, but I remember the early years when we'd be asked by customers or investors, and when we told them that we employed quite a few prison leavers, they would always say, "Oh, has anything gone wrong yet? Have you seen theft or incidents?" And I'd say, "No, absolutely not. This is they're just human beings like you and me." And yes, hospitality environments have lower level incidents, but they also happen for those employers who don't employ prison leavers, such as lateness or absence, and but that's normal. It's part of the course.
And I mean, I think the other thing about criminal records, and you know, these are great employers, but we have a whole cadre of jobs in this country which are for professionals and teachers and so on, where you need these other kind of DBS checks. And because so many highly paid jobs require the higher level of DBS checks, it means it's a real impediment to prison leavers having genuine social mobility.
Can I say though that we thankfully haven't found that the supply of really eager businesses has been a problem over the last few years, and actually we've probably had hundreds of registrations just on our website alone with organisations, your smallest local ones with it's a one-person show through to your large organisations, whether it's hospitality and Marston's, constructions and Waits, and the kind of more traditional sectors that are probably more open to looking into hire slightly differently. So construction, hospitality, manufacturing and logistics being a few of them, but also from those organisations that have historically been quite closed off, I think. So we've, KPMG are one of the organisations that in the last few years have been really vocal and have been actively wanting to partner with prisons. Within government ourselves, we have a scheme called Going Forward into Employment. So departments can hire. We recruit into our own team. So there are 3 members of our own staff who have been able to go through the vetting and so on. It isn't easy. But it takes the motivation. It takes the persistence, and it takes the motivation from an employer and individuals to get through it. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable, even within our own teams.
And can I ask you about what has worked, because you talked before about partnerships and brokerage. What are you doing practically that's helping more employers either come forward or enable successful placements?
So one of the things I think Penelope mentioned was the public narrative around this. One of the successes, I think, from the employment advisory boards is that is a network of businesses who are hiring that are often individuals who are at the top of their organisations and have influence at a sectoral level, at potentially a national level. And whilst it's all well and good, us talking about as part of the prison service or even as government about the benefits that there are to businesses, about creating talent pipelines, about filling recruitment shortages and so on. The best thing that we've found is that voice from businesses in creating a movement of organisations and giving that kind of peer-to-peer support through networking organisations like the employment EFRA, their Employers Forum for Reducing Reoffending. It's organisations coming together to build that narrative, to keep that momentum going forward, and to encourage and support others who might be facing similar challenges within their organisations to create the vacancy pipeline. So that's a really key thing, to keep that kind of pool of interested employers coming more towards us. And it is a really easy route to register interest in working with a prison, and there's kind of a matchmaking element that goes on depending on the scale of what an organisation is looking to do. And just Max mentioned, sometimes it's about, I think Nick as well, around people meeting the people within prisons and taking away some of those stereotypes, taking away some of those misnomers about what they see or perceive as someone who has been inside prison, and And you can do that as if you're, as an employer by signing up to some of the sectoral events that go on. There's a campaign we run multiple times throughout the year that focuses on specific sectors called Unlocking. And that's an opportunity for new employers and established employers to come together, visit prisons, run recruitment events, meet those prison employment leads, talk to others, talk to that whole kind of infrastructure that's working within prisons and in the community to support people into work.
We'll go to questions in a second. Nick, final word on this. What gets employers engaged and keeps them engaged?
Yes, I think we information share completely. So we will tell everyone everything that we do, everything that works, everything that doesn't. We'll give them all of our statistics. We'll just be completely authentic about the whole thing, as will other organisations, as will PELs as well. So prison employment leads will actively invite employers into their prisons, get them to have a look around. That's really engaging. And also telling people stories, telling people the reasons why it's a good thing to do. I think it's really interesting with these sorts of, because all of this is people who need reasonable adjustments to succeed in the workplace. And it's just one of those barriers. So you wouldn't look the same at someone who had neurodiversity or a mental health condition. And I think we just need to remove that barrier that this is a taboo subject, because it's not. The number of people with convictions or with cautions is so vast that if we just take away this massive percentage of the population from being able to work, we're really kicking ourselves in the foot here. Mm-hmm. And I think the way to present it to employers is to show them how it's been successful in your operation. We'll regularly have people come around, cook, we'll show them the kitchens, and we'll say, if you can point out which one of the people in this kitchen's been in prison, we'll give her a free lasagna. Because you won't be able to. You won't be able to. These aren't these like beasts that live among us. These are genuine people. They're just people. And as Max has stated earlier, the retention's better. They're more loyal. I know I certainly am, because I'm scared that I won't get a job elsewhere because of the statistics that Penelope gave. Mm. The fact that Cook gave me a chance, I only worked at Cook because no one else would hire me. So in 2016, when I came out of prison, no one else would hire me at all. And I would never have worked at Cook. So it's a quid pro quo. They got a very good employee in me, and I'll be modest there. But they got a very good employee in me, and I got a really good job that I would never have got otherwise. So it's really interesting how things align. But the wins that we get from employing people far outweigh the negatives, and there are negatives. There are lots of loopholes. There's quite often a change in governor or a change in one person in a prison can drastically affect your relationship with them, and that's fine. You've just got to understand that the stream of brilliance that you can get from a prison is fantastic. And I think as a society, if we only focus on the past and what people have done, then how are we going to move forward? We're not going to look at the future. As I said, we've all made mistakes in the past, and I'm sure everyone in this room has done something that could have landed them in trouble or in prison. And maybe you've been lucky, maybe you haven't. But I think if we just discard this huge number of people from being in our workforce, we're really not doing ourselves any favours.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to questions now. Before we do it, I'm just going to do a quick poll. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work, but I'm going to try and ask a question, which is, in your opinion, is this coming on? So I think the idea is that I'm going to conduct a live poll asking you to share your views on the following question. In your opinion, which of these factors do you think is the single biggest systemic barrier to achieving long-term employment for prison leavers? Is it 1, employer stigma, the reluctance to hire and limited incentives to support businesses? 2, transitional support, so gaps in housing, health, probation services, skills provision, or fragmented systems, so fragmented delivery across prisons and other services? So I don't know what the sample size is online, but we've got a very clear picture at the moment. Give it a minute.
I think this, you can see in the top right-hand corner how many people have voted.
Okay. Your internet's not working. I'm sorry. Okay. We'll keep that going, and please carry on. We might come back to it and see whether anyone disagrees with the findings. Let me throw it open to the audience first of all for some questions, and why don't we take a couple at a time, and then we'll go to the panel. Yes. Hold on 1 second. We'll just get you the mic.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Daniel. I work for a prison release charity called Switchback. So we work with people when they're coming out of prison, supporting them with the transition and working through a lot of the barriers that have been discussed by the panel. I guess my question is about what John mentioned around like the 70% of people who still aren't employed after 6 months. And given how much amazing work the New Futures Network has done in a difficult context around employers, my perception is that there's a lot of employers, and it's kind of borne out in that poll, that want to work with prison leavers now, but yeah, are we doing enough to support prison leavers with their personal like challenges, mental health, like looking at the individual person? Because I think you mentioned about the importance of not qualifications, but someone who's ready to work, but that could be mental health and a lot of these sorts of issues that we know are struggling. And specifically, I will stop there, in terms of the high rate of recall at the moment. So we're seeing nearly 3 in 4 people who are released from prison are recalled within 12 months. So is that something that you've experienced, and is it disrupting? So, yeah. The two questions, if I summarize it, is
I've got
you've got the impact of recall on employment outcomes, and how can we plug this gap in transitional support?
Great. I was going to ask for sort of 2 questions amongst 2 different people, but as you, I think there's 3 questions. Let's go to the panel first. John, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the sort of the whole person and the transitional support thing, absolutely. In order for someone to be successful when they leave prison, there's a whole series of building blocks that need to be in place around housing, around employment, around health and well-being, whether that's mental health or physical health, in terms of being able to continue with any medical treatment they might be getting. And if you want to give someone the best chance of succeeding when they leave, you need to get all those different elements right. And when you talk to people who've left prison, who've gone on to flourish, often it has been that all or most of those building blocks have been in place around that. So I think education, training, skills, employment, the really good work that has been done on that are really important, but they can never be the whole picture. You need to think about the whole person and what their individual needs are to give them the best chance to succeed when they leave prison. And leaving prison is really difficult, particularly if you've been in prison for a long time, or you've been in prison since you were a child or a very young adult, you're coming out in your 20s or 30s. It's really challenging, and the easier we make it for people, the more likely they are to succeed, and that will obviously pay us back in financial, but also in kind of well-being terms over their whole life. So I think we do need to look at the whole person, and things like education and training, anything that gives people hope and makes them think that they can turn their lives around and gives them self-confidence, can all contribute to all those different things that we know will make them work.
Great. Who else wants to come on this?
Can I just say, one way of helping prisoners get employment is to have fewer people in prison, because actually the resources available in prison to create these building blocks, to give people training, et cetera, are very limited, and we don't even get the prisoners out of their cell. In our country, we, per capita, imprison more people than anywhere in Western Europe. And so that would be a good starting point.
Okay.
I think also, hi Dan, also in terms of what we can do more in the community, I think that's something that will really help us in shifting the dial on how many people can take up work when they're released, but also if they're community sentenced. Because one thing that people leave with often is a sense of perhaps some hope if they've had an experience and they've had the time in prison where the right connections have been made to support those kind of health outcomes, accommodation outcomes, and all of those things that we know that will support someone into work. But in the absence of that, and particularly if someone's been recalled for a short time or they're on a short sentence, it's really difficult to get all of those things, set up before someone leaves. So I think, again, it's going back to how within the community space as well, that kind of partnerships and network forming between organisations like the Department for Work and Pensions, it's, mental health organisations. I think one of the things that the third sector, for example, does really well is support people with those very acute needs and some of the hardest to reach people who are perhaps furthest away from the, taking up employment on their release. So it's more of that.
Right, I was going to come to the rest of the audience unless you wanted to come in. No, okay, great. Any more questions? Yes, lady over there.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Louise Glover and I'm representing the first 1001 Days movement. So we advocate for babies and families in the first 2 years of life. And I just want to ask what sort of extra support do you think we need to give to prisoners who are released, who have a young family with the added pressures that's involved with that?
Great, thank you. You want to pick that one up?
I think for women who are released in particular, and also people who have families within the community, it's an additional barrier to think about. And we see in the stats that actually, particularly for women leaving prison, they're disproportionately disadvantaged from taking out work on their release. And over a number of studies and so on, it shows that being a caregiver is a primary reason for women not being able to take up work on their release. And there's a larger gap than usual between someone taking up work. So it's usually not within that first 6 weeks. It might be within the next few months. So again, it's sort of trying to coalesce around the support that's needed and the early identification of needs to get those services, ready for when someone leaves prison.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is what we do as a charity is we provide access to distance learning, so for people in prison. This is anecdotal, but a lot of people who apply to do courses with us, men and women, but particularly men, when they feed back afterwards, one of the motivations for doing it and for completing it is because they've got young children and they're like, we get so many people saying, I want to make my child proud of me, I want to show them that I'm trying to change. So I think having young children for some people is a motivator to try and turn their lives around, and to try and, when they leave prison, that they can provide for them, that they can have a positive engagement with them. And it's something that we really see a lot of in terms of that feedback. So I think it can create additional barriers and challenges, but can also be a really powerful motivator for people to change and to try and do things that will demonstrate to their family, whether it's partners or children, that they are trying to turn their lives around. So it can be a positive motivator as well.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the rest of the, Hold on one sec.
My name's Andrew, so I work in the private sector in financial services, but I ask my question as someone who's been a magistrate for 10 years and therefore, I guess, does occasionally send people to prison. And you somewhat preempted some of my question, but my question is around sort of short-term sentences, suspended sentences, community sentences. Those people need help too. And I just wonder how we can address that as well.
I mean, I think they do, and I think the stats which the government publish on people on probation are not that positive. Have they been improving? So they do measure employment of people on probation, and it's still, I think, the minority. I think it's a sort of, for those people, it's the general employment services that are available to people who struggle with work or struggle to get work. But I think the need is just as great. And I will say again that, practically everybody who gets a court conviction has a criminal record. And that is the problem for them trying to get any employment. And, the fact is, I'd love that criminal records regime revolutionized, but the individual needs really good advice. And I would say, as part of the sentencing regime myself, that the criminal record associated with any sentence that somebody gets or caution should be made clear to them at that point, because a lot of people really don't understand the implications of the record when they are convicted.
Statistically speaking, short sentences attract the highest reoffending rates, and that's a big issue here. So, and it's one thing also that's been a challenge. We've had more and more short sentences attracting higher reoffending rates.
But also there's a record high remand population, and a lot of the people on remand who are awaiting trial, a proportion of them were acquitted, and the whole employment kind of situation and readying people and so on is just made more difficult by that unpredictability. And I think we need to look at the remand population in terms of employment as well as its own thing and try and do specific programs for those people.
Okay. So one thing I would say on short sentences and on recall, which I don't think any of us really got answer very well, is that there's been legislation gone through recently which will, if it delivers what it's intended to deliver, substantially reduce the number of people who are going to prison on short sentences. And given that, as you said, higher reoffending rates and much lower employment rates for people leaving on short sentences than there are for people on longer sentences, that can be a good thing if it reduces the churn of people through prisons and gives education departments and other people more time to work with a smaller population of people who are there. But the same bit of legislation is introducing changes to recall, where there'll be people coming in for a 56-day fixed period. And it's quite hard to think what you're going to usefully do with someone in a 56-day period. So I think there will be something for prisons to think about if the numbers of people being recalled continue to be high and they're there for 56 days, how do you provide them with useful support, education, training, linked with employers to try and make sure that when they go out again, they stay out and try and retain any housing or jobs that they might have got for that period.
And for your question, the part of your question which was around people who were community sentenced as well, I think it's really important to make the distinction of the types of offences that you would commonly have for someone that hasn't gone to prison. Of course, if generally people that have gone to prison have done something that is more serious than if you were have to have a sentence alone. And I know you're a magistrate, so you know that really well, but of course, the resources that you have within the community are so different to when you're in prison and when you're in custody, including just having access to the internet. You can conduct a job search for most people unless your license conditions, have restrictions and so on, but you can conduct a job search. You can go into your DWP job centre and get that support, which of course is not available to someone who is in custody. Despite us, we are making some changes to introduce a digital employment service. It won't be to the outside world, but a very restricted service that will support that.
Nick?
And also, because we work with people who have been convicted or haven't been to prison, we also work with people who are awaiting trial. Now, that's a really tricky thing. And employers, I can understand why an employer might not want to hire someone who's awaiting trial. It's really, they're in a grey area. They don't know if they could be going to prison. They don't know for how long. We've had people who have been awaiting trial for 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's like the stress that they must be going through every day, just thinking, well, I don't know what's going to happen for 4 or 5 years. And then they've been acquitted after 5 years and have actually been found not guilty of the thing. And yeah, it's really stressful time for them. So I can understand why other employers may not take a punt on that person. And I think there's got to be a better way of doing that. And also in terms of short-term sentences, the cost of putting someone in prison for 2 weeks compared to maybe offering them sort of rehab and looking at the cause of the problem rather than just punishing someone for 2 weeks, what's that going to do compared to actually looking at why the offence was caused, what we can do to sort of look into that deeper and stop it from happening again.
Great, thank you. Are there any things online? Do you want to just read out maybe 2 or 3?
Yeah. Haley asks, a number of factors in the UK are already impeding employment generally. Increases in tax, the use of AI in the workplace, and in the use of AI in selecting interview candidates. What impact do you think these barriers are having or will have for prison leavers finding work, and what is being done to counter these effects? And then Paul asks, to what extent do the panel think that a lack of digital skills and access to relevant recruitment platforms digitally in prison shapes or prevents supporting prison leavers into long-term employment? And what should this look like moving forwards in terms of how prisons could or should be digitised?
Great. For the labour market one, why didn't Serena, you take that? And I don't know if anyone else wants to come in.
I'd love to say something about the digital service as well. So In terms of the labour market, the use of AI and how people within prison might be disadvantaged, I think it's something that we really need to consider in more depth because, of course, you don't have access to AI to support in writing an application and even searching for an employer and understanding who they are, what they do, and even some of those basic things that you would be required as part of an application to do. So I think already we're behind in the kind of support for prisoners in terms of CV writing, disclosure letters, and so on. So it's an area that we will need to consider kind of going forward as to how much and how we can bring in that career support and which kind of partners can help us to do that. And to the question around the kind of digital offer, for the last few years we've been working on a solution to that. So the current way that jobs are advertised in prisons is really analog. Within those employment hubs that I mentioned, it's almost like an old-time post office where you see postcards put up on boards. So of course there are real inherent problems to that. Some of those jobs will be closing. The information might be out of date. It's really limited in terms of its search. The radius of where you're looking, as well as limited in terms of what jobs can be advertised. So for the last few years, we've been working on a new digital employment service, and it has two parts. One is a staff-facing side, which will enable staff to assess the work readiness of prisoners based on a few kind of criteria, some of those really big ones. Number one being, do you want support? Have you had a job before? What's your accommodation status and health status, and a few other questions. And a really key feature and kind of first of its kind functionality for us within prisons is to be able to, for employers, the ones that we work with, so it's not an open system, it's a closed system to employers that are partnered with prisons, will be able to advertise their vacancies. Meaning that for the staff, so prison employment leads, as well as work coaches or anyone that will be working with someone ahead of their release, will be able to look at and support prisoners to search for and find jobs in a much more efficient way. And it increases the searchability, improves access for prisoners in terms of what kind of jobs you can look for, and it makes sure that jobs are more matched with location. We're rolled out actually on that staff-facing part of the service to 80 prisons, which is I'm really pleased about, and due to get up to 93 by the end of February, with the prisoner-facing side of that service to be launched hopefully later this year. And the idea being that question was around digital literacy. The idea is that it's a platform that is in keeping with government standards around accessibility, and it's something that replicates a job search like the gov.uk service in the community as well.
Great, thank you.
Well, just on the digital point, I think that as well as digital access to digital job searching, there's also an issue about training, giving people digital skills if they don't have them and arriving in prison, and also all the educational opportunities that are available to people in the community online that aren't available in prison. I think that's somewhere where prisons are making real progress at the moment. So a new digital education platform was rolled out across education departments last year, so it's now a consistent presence across education departments in all prisons. So there have been real improvements. And I think that is a place where those improvements can be built on so that people both learn the digital skills you now need in the community, but also can access just a whole range of educational opportunities. It can't replace face-to-face teaching, but it can complement it and give people opportunities to progress and to build up skills they wouldn't otherwise get access to when they're ready to leave. They've got those skills and knowledge already.
Great. Let's take final two questions, and I'm going to ask the panelists to sort of ask each of you to answer them, and also, go for it.
I've been involved in establishing a programme that's still at a very early stage, actually looking at self-employment and also digital skills and AI training to really help people to feel like they've got a personal assistant to do that. I just have a general question. Is it an area of focus within the justice system, self-employment? Because the charities we're working with seem to say that for many people it is really the only option. So yeah, just keen to hear thoughts on that generally.
Great point. Yeah, final question here.
Hi, this is Dr. Ramesh, and I'm from University of Westminster. Basically, I have a similar question. We run projects. Well, I mean, I'm personally involved with NatWest Bank prior to joining University of Westminster. Self-employment. So we basically help prisoners get job self-employed because we find getting a job employed, there are a lot of obstacles they have to come through. DBS check, and ask DBS check. Sometimes they don't have right set of skills. So if we can equip them with the right set of skills, they can employ themselves. So that's I think a solution to get more people employed. Now, if it's very difficult to see, I can think from the employer's point of view why they don't want to employ. I'm by profession, I'm a chartered accountant, and I'm also an educator for many years. And I'm practicing accountant. I work in real world, solving problems for companies. Now, I mean, my own DBS, I have to produce DBS by myself every year to renew my license to practice in the UK. Now, I'm just thinking, how would the prisoners intending or wanting to do professional qualification in accounting and finance can take this as a career? So this is what I was thinking, self-employment, again, going back to the same question, what is your thoughts? Is there a real drive in self-employment rather than seeking for employment?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Nick, first of all, perhaps you can answer that question on self-employment, but also perhaps come back to this poll.
Yeah.
Would you rank them in the same order, or would you have a different ranking? I'm going to ask everyone to sort of answer the self-employment question, but give me your rank order as well.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so in terms of self-employment, obviously I'm in sort of networks where I speak with lots of other people with lived experience, and it is becoming quite a theme where people, if they do feel like they've learned skills within prison but can't go to a company with those skills, they will just become self-employed. But it's about educating people what they can do. So if it is a company, or you will need to create your own company but you will require a DBS, then that might not be the right pathway for you. And it's all about educating. It's about teaching people what they can do, what they can't. And there's some wonderful charities out there, excellent charities, Switchback, Stand Out, loads of companies who offer so much support, but it would be great if that wasn't charities who are doing it. It would be great if it was the government and it was, money funded then rather than it constantly being charities. But yeah, in terms of self-employment, it's definitely a route. It's definitely a route that works, but it's hard work. It really is hard work, and you need resilience. You need to be a good salesperson, and some of these people will succeed. But what we don't want to do is set people on a pathway that's built to fail. So it's if we tell 80,000 prisoners that they can go out and become self-employed, is that sustainable? I don't know. So it's about finding the right people and offering them right advice to succeed, I would say. And then just in terms of these, housing is the major issue. I came out
more than employment stigma for you.
Yeah, I came out of prison and I didn't have a house, so I didn't even think about work. So without being able, I'm just thinking how to survive. I'm not thinking about a job. So you don't even think about speaking from my experience, I didn't think about work because I was trying to survive. So stigma didn't come top of that list at all because I didn't have a house. In terms of stigma is obviously a big thing. It is just that you hear that someone's been to prison, you think, not you, but yeah, if someone hears that someone's been to prison, they think bad person. And that's it's about just getting rid of that stigma. And there's so much in the media now that's changing that dynamic, because I'm also an advocate for mental health, and it would be, someone with bipolar is, dangerous or something like this. It's just about changing that stigma and turning it around from what it actually means. It means that someone's done something that they're definitely not proud of. It was probably a poor time in their life. They've done something that was a mistake, and they've been punished for that. So why are we continuing to punish them? So it's just about changing that mindset for me.
Great, thank you. Srini?
I think I would probably rank them in the same order there, or perhaps even actually the fragmented systems above even the employer stigma, because I think it's still a real challenge that we need to combat.
Okay. Penelope?
I mean, I would say transitional support is the immediate issue when people leave prison. But in the long term of their career trajectory, it's the employer stigma which will hold them back. And it will hold them back in terms of they see a DBS check or they learn about a criminal conviction and then won't employ that person or won't give them a promotion or whatever. In terms of self-employment, I would say it is a great route, but we can't kind of ignore the elephant in the room, which is say, oh, go for self-employment because you won't have to do a DBS check. We need to reform these DBS checks so that they don't reveal so many old and minor convictions and so that people's attitude to them is more enlightened. And can I say the government has just brought in legislation which will mean more self-employed people have to have DBS checks. So this is the right thing to do, but private tutors, you know, like people who offer music lessons or French or whatever, didn't previously need to have a DBS check. They now do, so that, you know, a parent will be able to ask that tutor for their DBS check. So it's going to increase that for self-employed people.
Okay, thanks.
I would rank transitional support, such as housing, at the top. In my little bubble, we work with lots of great employers that will take our participants. So I would actually rank that lower, but I do realize that it's not a representative sample. I actually think skills provision is so poor and so underfunded that it poses a big problem.
Mm-hmm. John?
Yeah, on the self-employment thing, we, as I mentioned, we offer distance learning courses, and one of our top 10 courses every year is a business startup course. There are a lot of people who are interested in self-employment as a route. I think can be a very rewarding route to go down. It can avoid some of the barriers, but it's really challenging as well. And that gets you back to some of that basic skills provision. If you want to be self-employed, if you want to run a business with all the admin that comes with that, you need to have those core functional skills that enable you to do that. And if you've got those building blocks in place, then I think it's absolutely something that we should be supporting people to do. But I don't think we should necessarily be presenting it as this is an easy way out in terms of you can avoid all the challenges that come with having a job, because being self-employed doesn't avoid all those challenges and has other ones as well. In terms of the ranking, I mean, if there was an all of the above option, that's what I would have gone for. I obviously think skills provision is really important. I'm particularly thinking longer term in terms of developing and building a career and getting a good quality job, making sure you have those skills to enable you to do that and to enable you to progress in your career, whether you get them in prison or whether you get them when you leave prison. You know, the value of education and training is, you know, undisputed, and I think ensuring people have access to that is really important in terms of their future employment trajectory and them having a fulfilling job that enables them to thrive after they've left prison.
Great, thank you very much. Can I say thank you to the panellists, to Nick, Serini, Penelope, Max, John. Really good discussion, and thank you to you for all the really good questions and online. That was our latest series in How to Make Good Things Happen. I think we've spoken a lot, to be honest, about the massive challenges, because we've got a long way to go before this is the majority of people actually being employed after 6 months rather than still the minority. But the fact that we have come and made some significant progress should give us the confidence to actually go further, I think would probably be my takeaway, because there are some significant opportunities here. But thank you very much again. Do stay for a drink, and we'll leave it there. Thank you.